The federal agent-involved shootings in Minneapolis and Portland are raising questions about the credibility of information coming from the Trump administration. The president, vice president, and Homeland Security secretary have all called the incident domestic terrorism, defending the ICE agent and claiming Renee Good used her vehicle as a weapon, despite multiple videos of the incident showing something arguably different. And now DHS is using similar language to describe what happened in Portland, Oregon, where 2 people were shot by Border Patrol agents during a traffic stop, claiming the driver, quote, weaponized his vehicle and attempted to run over law enforcement agents. But Portland's mayor says the federal government has a credibility problem.
There was a time when we could take them at their word. That time is long past. That is why we are calling on ICE to halt all operations in Portland until a full and independent investigation can take place.
Let's bring in MS Now columnist and contributor Philip Bump, who is out with a brand new column that argues Kristi Noem and DHS do not deserve the benefit of the doubt. Also joining us, immigration attorney Alan Orr. So, Philip, I know you've been looking into the ways that DHS has described ICE-involved incidents over the past year. What have you found out?
You noted at the top of this segment that you thought they were raising questions as whether or not they could be trusted. I think we have the answer, which is they fundamentally can't be, that we shouldn't take at face value what Kristi Noem is saying or Tricia McLaughlin, who works for her. And what I found is a pattern of the Department of Homeland Security and its officers making claims either publicly or in court documents that were found to be false. There was perhaps the best distillation of it came in a legal filing, a ruling from a judge, Sarah Ellis in Illinois, late last year, in which she actually had a whole section of the ruling, which was assessing the credibility of DHS and determining that it was simply not credible, that the evidence they presented didn't say what they said it did, that individual staffers for DHS, including Greg Bravino from the Border Patrol, who's really been at the forefront of a lot of these raids, that he himself had lied repeatedly as part of the investigation and part of the lawsuit. And you see the same thing from Noem, you see the same thing from McLaughlin, you see the same thing in the public statements that have been made that very, very quickly are found not to actually reflect what actually happened.
Well, Alan, I want to play what 2 members of the administration who have doubled down on their conclusion have had to say.
It was an act of domestic terrorism. A woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle.
Many people in this room have been lying about this attack. She was trying to ram this guy with her car. He shot back. He defended himself.
How does this complicate or make, some people would argue, virtually impossible what all the folks in Portland are saying, what all the folks in Minneapolis are saying, what I think most Americans would say, which is we want a fair investigation here?
And I think it's a little bit broader than just this one case, right? We're talking about a system and a pattern that's been created, this narrative, and that's what we're talking about before. When the law doesn't work for you as a lawyer, you go to the facts. And when the facts don't work for you and you miscrew the facts and you change the facts in such a way, it becomes a narrative. And when you're telling a narrative over facts, then you lose credibility. And that's what we're seeing right now happen, because what that does is isolate power. But power without credibility is not safety. And that's the erosion that we're happening right now. The government really needs a better lawyer, because all these frontward statements about we're going to get the Somalis, we're going to get this group, that group's this, that group's that, the same thing we saw in the Garcia case, they make these statements and it looks like selective persecution and it ruins their cases in court.
And Philip, actually, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal has been investigating the use of force by ICE officers since last August. Here's what he told our Chris Hayes.
In almost every one of these 22 separate instances that we documented, we found that the reaction of ICE was, in fact, to try to discourage people from doing videos. In fact, they attacked them physically. They denied that anything wrong was done. They alleged there were injuries to the ICE agents. It is a pattern.
And we just heard reporting from Rosa Flores. I don't know if you heard it, about how the statements have changed in Portland, Philip. Look, there are people who may listen to what J.D. Vance has to say, who may read what the president has to say and just believe it on face value. But when people see these videos and they hear what people who were actually there had to say about what they saw with their own eyes, I wonder if this kind of pattern works for them now.
It's a fair question. I mean, I think we've seen over the course of the past 2 days that even the reactions to the video, which seem fairly clear cut, I mean, we've had lots of independent analyses from independent media outlets that look at what actually occurred in the shooting of Renee Good, and people refuse to believe it. People choose to believe that there is this huge conspiracy of bias against the right and against the administration, and that comes into play. I will note, to the point that was just made by the senator there, that the flip side of what he's describing is also true. I went back and looked. We hear constantly that the ICE officers need to be protected, that they're facing all this big increase in assaults. I actually looked last year at where these assaults had occurred, and the assaults that I could find that were on record were primarily at ICE detention facilities. It is not the case that these people are being identified and then attacked outside their homes or things along those lines. They're being attacked in the line of duty, which of course is bad. You shouldn't attack ICE officers, no question about it. But it is also the case that they're exaggerating the threat to ICE officers in these incidents, in part to give themselves the cover to avoid accountability and to be able to act the way that they want to act.
And then, Alan, there's a question that I think is raised by The Atlantic's Adam Serwer, who wrote, quote, "The administration has repeatedly targeted small and politically disempowered populations, Haitians, Somalis, trans people, in order to justify abuses of power." And here's what Minnesota Council member Jason Chavez said.
What has descended upon Minneapolis and in this state is not the American dream. It is not what the American dream is about. Our immigrant neighbors are here to work. They're here to provide for their family and to achieve prosperity. Instead, what we are seeing in Minneapolis and across the state is ICE kidnapping our family. As we continue to ask for justice for Renee Good, we're going to ask our community members to stay on alert.
Talk about the fear you see and hear about on the streets. And what does this mean for the country going forward? I'm so struck by that beautiful little girl with her mom and the little girl wondering why her classmates are missing from school for a couple of weeks at a time.
So let's start with the premise that all of this is supposed to be about safety of the American people. And right now, many Americans do not feel safe anywhere. So that's the major problem that we have with this reign of enforcement. And when people think about ICE, ICE was created in 2003 and really hasn't seen that much reform. So the issues that Chris Murphy are trying to address are things that would be systematically done when you're trying to improve the enforcement of individuals in the United States after 9/11, because we're not in a 9/11 situation. And many Americans fear ICE more than those who don't. When we look at Minnesota specifically, and we see even this morning, they announced that they were going to go back in and open some 5,000 refugee cases of individuals who have not received their green card cases to see if they can reject and remove them. They've sent 500 more officers there after the incident that occurred on the street. That doesn't sound like sound policing. Generally, what would happen in this case that I've seen on TV and in reality is there would be a cooling off in which you would say, let things settle down and then we'll go back in, because enforcement does not have to happen on the street. ICE enforcement under previous administrations, even the Obama administration, which deported more people, had a more of a due process system. You don't have to collect people on the street. There are other ways to do this, and that's what is important to know about the system. We're not saying that deportation does not have a place in immigration system. We're saying the way that we do this, where we're violating a lot of rights of United States citizens, over 100 of them reported to Congress from different watch groups, and we see it every day. This isn't an isolated story. This is a nationwide story of a narrative that's giving the government the power to do exactly what they want to do to anybody in the system, regardless of their immigration status.
Philip Bump, Alan Orr, thank you both.